Yeah, as far as the Nikolai Ehlers one, you can make the salary cap work pretty easily because the Penguins now have a surplus at center, right?
Mhm.
Lars Eller to the Winnipeg Jets, maybe a little bit of retention, and you get Ehlers down at what, $4 million, retaining 33% of that. That could work, but again, Kyle Dubas is saying it's a rebuild. The one way that I could see him pulling the trigger on a guy like Nikolai Ehlers, because, I mean, all of these trade options outside of Nick Robertson, who's a restricted free agent, the other three trade options all have 2 years left, which works with the timeline,
Mhm.
right? So the term worked with the timeline. The money, Linus is going to be a little bit more difficult because he has that $8.7 million price tag, but also, the Columbus Blue Jackets seems to be the one that is most likely on the way out. The
Mhm.
other two, you could see those teams potentially just retaining on those players. Shoot, the Winnipeg Jets did that last season with everybody that they seemingly had on the trade block. But when I look at Ehlers, the one big factor there is they're also trying to potentially offload Rutger McGroarty, 20 years old, gold medalist for World Juniors, stud at Michigan, wants to make the jump to the NHL. The Penguins right now, they have those opportunities available, right? And if McGroarty stays this year in the NHL and the Penguins are saying, well, once you're done at Michigan this year, you're guaranteed a spot and you're guaranteed your ELC to close out the season. I don't know what they could say with him, but at 20 years old, I'm willing to trade away some future assets to get Nikolai Ehlers for the next couple of years and bring in a guy the caliber of Rutger McGroarty, because we talked about the Jake Gensel trade and bringing in those players that automatically became top 10 prospects in the Penguins pool. You bring in Rutger McGroarty, he is 1A, 1B with Braden Yeager immediately, and he is more likely to be ready sooner than Braden Yeager. And can you imagine going into the future? I know that you might have to trade a first round pick, but shoot, you can do what the Penguins did in the other way earlier this week with the Riley Smith trade. Trade out one of those picks from a couple years down the line, because if you trade away, say, a 2027 first round pick, guess what you're able to do? By 2027, probably end up trading away some better players, and you can potentially recoup, and that gives you plenty of time to recoup one of those first round picks. At that point, Brian Rust won't have a no movement clause, and who knows where the Penguins are going to be by 2025 and 2026. But that's why I think of them, the best option, if you can get Rutger McGroarty included, is the Nikolai Ehlers one. Outside of that, Nicholas Robertson's a little bit of a risk because he hasn't really proven to be a bona fide top line winger. But I do think that he has the potential there, and I think it's worth taking a risk on him, especially because the acquisition cost isn't going to be that high.
Yeah, I like the idea of bringing in Nicholas Robertson, but maybe not as that first line winger, just as an option for the team, as a player who can come in and take a new scenery and prove himself, because he's been needing to. And there's the obvious familiarity with Kyle Dubas already. I think that's a good option. Again, just in a different conversation, not in this specific one, not in this specific first line winger role, but just as a player the Penguins should look to add. I think that one, outside of the context of Sidney Crosby, is a good addition for the Penguins.
Yeah, and that brings to light another avenue here for Kyle Dubas, and that is, we've been saying you'd like to, and you would really have to bring in somebody to bump Drew O'Connor down, but at the same time, if he's looking at this as in, I don't want to just acquire a top line winger to acquire a top line winger, I don't want to expend the assets on it, then it's not like Drew O'Connor didn't hold his own on that first line. And maybe you do bring in a Nicholas Robertson, and maybe eventually, Nick Robertson does get an opportunity alongside Sidney Crosby, because we've seen players with lower ceilings succeed with Sidney Crosby. Dominic Simone, that's the only reason he had a career as long as he did, is because he succeeded with Sidney Crosby. I mean, you talked about Pascal Dupuis, who has a much higher skill level than Dominic Simone, but he was looked at as, part of one of the best first lines in hockey for a couple of seasons in Pascal Dupuis. So, I don't hate that option either, but I still feel like, even though the Penguins are a rebuilding team and sometimes it's going to be hard to think that way, I still think they need to go out there and get somebody of a higher level to go into their top six, and that'll have a trickle-down effect on the rest of the lineup. But I still feel like one of those other options, specifically, I've fallen in love with the Ehlers thing. I know it's outside the realm of possibility. It's a long shot at this point, but I've fallen in love with that Ehlers-McGroarty package and whatever it takes to get them, whether that's, trading away. I wouldn't trade away Braden Yeager, but shy of that, I would trade away probably, Koivunen or
Cool.
Ponomarov if it
Okay.
meant bringing Nikolai Ehlers in for 2 years and getting Rutger McGroarty as well.